I love you, Mommy.
Chapter 6, The King of Hell. In the little northern frontier town of Wells, Maine, most everybody liked and respected their minister, a short, strong, dark-haired man named George Burroughs, with a history performing heroic deeds for neighbors. During just the previous summer, for example, he had helped his fellow citizens escape from Indian attacks when warriors snuck up to 3 nearby towns and laid them all to waste. One of the Burroughs' admirers called him self-defying, generous, and public-spirited. Another, who knew him well, wrote that he was an able, intelligent, true-minded man, sincere, humble in spirit, devoted as a minister, and generous as a citizen. Although acknowledged as an excellent athlete and a scholar, Burroughs willingly ministered to people of every faith. Reverend Burroughs had not spent his entire life in Maine. During the early 1600s, he had served 2 years as minister of Salem Village and even lived in the same house now occupied by Reverend Parris. Burroughs had headed for Maine after 2 grave misfortunes befell him in Salem. First, his wife died, and then he got into a bitter dispute with the Putnam family over a debt he owed for her funeral expenses. He had no money because he never received his salary. Though it had taken 10 long years since he had lived in Salem Village, Burroughs was certainly not forgotten, because on April 20th, 1692, Thomas Putnam's daughter, Anne, swore she had seen the apparition of a minister. Anne claimed that she had been grievously afraid, crying, "Oh, dreadful, dreadful! Here is a minister! Are ministers witches too? What is your name?" He told me that his name was George Burroughs. And the next evening Reverend Parris' niece, Abigail Williams, also reported the former minister Burroughs was a wizard. 2 weeks later, Burroughs was eating dinner with his family up in Maine when he heard a ruckus outside of his door. In marched Maine's Field Marshal Jonathan Partridge, along with a small band of soldiers. Had they come to help the citizens of Wales fight off an Indian attack? Certainly not. They had come to arrest Burroughs, and arrest him they did. Despite the fact that his neighbors looked up to him as a friend and counselor, Burroughs was immediately escorted all the way down to Salem town, where he was suspected to have confederacy with the devil. Even in Salem, where everyone suspected everyone else of witchcraft, people argued fervently about Burroughs' guilt or innocence. One frontier militia leader said that he was a choice child of God, and God would clear up his innocency. Others thought he was a wife-beater, and yet another swore he had an evil eye, and he was the chief of all persons accused for witchcraft, or the ringleader of them all. By July, a 15-year-old girl from Andover named Mary Lacey Jr., who had confessed that she was a witch, could claim that she had flown to a secret communion where 77 witches were drinking blood and eating blood-colored bread. It was there she saw a woman named Martha Carrier, also from Andover, who was supposedly to have killed 13 people and was now Hell's own queen. And here it was, too, that she saw the devil make a promise. Reverend George Burroughs would soon be crowned King of Hell. Burroughs was examined several times in front of enormous crowds between the days of his first witchcraft investigation on May 9th and his official trial in Salem on August 5th. At least 30 accusers would pile up a mountain of sworn testimonies against him. What did they say? Some truly amazing things. Ann Putnam Jr. said, "He told me that he had 3 wives, and that he had bewitched the first 2 of them to death, and he bewitched a great many soldiers to death at the eastward. These soldiers had died 3 or 4 years earlier during battles that lost against the Indians, and some of the Burroughs detractors insisted that he was in cahoots with the enemy French and Indian soldiers. Since Putnam thought the Indians were devils, they believed that Burroughs must be in cahoots with the devil too. Then Anne said, he told me that he was above a witch. He was a conjurer. She embellished her story even more later on. Immediately there appeared to me in the form of two dead women in winding sheets, and they turned their faces toward Mr. Burroughs and looked very red and angry, and told him that he had been a cruel man to them, and that their blood did cry for vengeance. Then these two women turned their faces toward me and looked as pale as a white wall, and told me that they were Mr. Burroughs' first two wives, and that he had murdered them. And one told me that he stabbed her under the left arm and put a piece of sealing wax on the ground, and she pulled aside the winding sheet and showed me the place. Next, a woman named Mary Toothtaker testified that the minister had ordered a convention of 305 witches to pull down the kingdom of Christ and set up the kingdom of Satan. Before long, confessed witches after confessed witch claimed that they had been baptized in the name of the devil by the king of hell himself, Reverend George Burroughs. 18-year-old Susan Sheldon, another refugee from the Indian War on the Maine frontier, said Burroughs threatened that if she wouldn't sign the devil's book, he would tear her to pieces, starve her to death, and choke her until her vitals gave out. And to scare her even more, he said he killed 3 children on the frontier. Smothered and choked 2 of his wives to death, their ghost again agreed, and murdered 2 of his own children. Though Burroughs was a short, slender man, some witnesses testified that he possessed superhuman strength that could only come from the devil. Why, he could put 2 fingers in a bunghole of enormous barrels of molasses or cider or meat and lift them out of a canoe all by himself. He could put 1 finger into the 7-foot-long muzzle of a heavy fowling gun and hold the weapon straight out in front of him at arm's length. He could run faster than any horse. He could turn into a gray cat. And a man named Thomas Rux swore that Burroughs could tell his thoughts. But who had made the most stunning accusations in the entire case? It was none other than Ann Putnam Jr.'s servant, Mercy Lewis. Unlike most of the young accusers, Lewis knew Burroughs, not from the time he lived in Salem Village, but from the time that he had spent as a minister of Falmouth, Maine, her hometown. When Lewis was 3 years old, Falmouth had been attacked and burned to cinders by Indians, and she and the few members of the family who were still alive had escaped to an island in Casco Bay with Reverend Burroughs' help. Much later, when she was 16 years old, Lewis's parents were killed, possibly right before her eyes, in another battle with the Indians, and she apparently became a servant in Burroughs' household for a short while after that. Burroughs had escaped from every single Indian attack on the frontier without a scratch. Did Lewis believe that he was an ally of the Indians? She thought the Indians were devils, and certainly wanted to get him in trouble, because this is what she swore under oath on April 3rd. On the evening of May 7th, before his first hearing had even begun, she had seen the spirit of Burroughs, whom she knew very well. This apparition tortured her horribly over and over again, urging her to sign her name in a mysterious book that he kept in his study. He said he had several books she had never seen, and he could use this one to raise the devil himself. He told Lewis the devil was his servant, and he had even commanded the devil to bewitch several other teenage girls. Again, he tortured Lewis, threatening to kill her if she told anybody what he had just said, and ordering her once more to sign her name in the devil's book. Though he was shaking her all to pieces, she cried she would never write in that book, even if he killed her. Then she told a rapt audience what happened 2 days later. Mr. Burroughs carried me up to an exceedingly high mountain and showed me all the kingdoms of earth, and told me he would give them all to me if I would write in his book, and if I would not, he would throw me down and break my neck. But I told him they were not his to give, and I would not write if he threw me down on 100 pitchforks. Upon hearing this testimony, the hideous clamor and screeching of the afflicted girls became so intense that they were removed from the courtroom for their own safety.